Hey guys, today we're going to do a quick demo on MaxScale that is running on a standard master-slave server setup. This demo basically consists of how MaxScale handles your various scenarios. The scenario is basically covering database failovers, your transaction failovers, and your connection failovers, and all sort of cool stuff. So at the end of this demo, we will have a very good understanding of what MaxScale does and how it does it, and what can you expect when you set up a MaxScale server on top of a master slave, or maybe you have a MariaDB Galera cluster running. So regardless of whatever you have, the end result will be the same. So let's take a quick look at the setup. So we have this 1, 2, 3, 4 nodes master slave setup that is already running. And then we got this MaxScale 2.3 that's also running at the moment. I'm going to connect to the MaxScale node very quickly. Okay, so let's maximize this. 232 is my MaxScale server. Okay, so if I do a MaxScale list server, okay, so MaxScale is currently not running. Let's start it up. All right, so we'll repeat the command again. All right, so we can see here, .71 is my master, and 72, 73, 74, they are all running as a slave node. And then, of course, we can see their respective GTIDs that are currently in place. Okay. I'm going to split this window into a couple of more sections at the bottom here, and then this one also. A new section to the right. Yeah, and this one finally, another one to the right. All right. Okay, so over here, I'm going to open up another MaxScale section. So that is a 232. All right, so we are here. And over here, I'm going to open the master node that is 71. Yeah, 71. So if I log in here, show databases. Yeah, so you can see some databases here. Over here, I'm going to log into probably 72, the slave training, and let's split up one more here to the bottom. All right, so this one, I'm going to open 73. All right, so we have all 3 nodes connected, so we will leave 74 for now. Probably we don't need it. Okay, so over here, I'm going to run this maxctl command, maxctl list servers command repeatedly, so that we get a continuously refreshing image of what's going on with the servers. So how we do that? Watch minus n1. So n1 means every 1 second refresh. What to refresh is this particular command. Servers. All right. So we can see a bit of a glitch here. This is nothing to do with the MaxScale. It's something to do with my terminal emulator. So that is somehow giving us this particular glitch of this particular row splitting up. But that doesn't matter. We are able to see the server list. Yeah. So over here, I'm gonna open up a new session to MaxScale. Before that, since this is a MaxScale server, I'm going to open up the MaxScale configuration just to have a quick look at what we have. This is MaxScale.cnf file. That's a default location. Okay, so we have this these 3 servers set up, and of course the IP address, the port number for each server, and the protocol is MariaDB backend. We know that already. So if we scroll down, so that's a 4th server. We have a monitor running. So that's the required one. We have a MariaDB mon as a module. So this will be our monitor, right? Monitor, and this monitor monitors these 4 servers. So which is what we are seeing here, 4 servers, and the monitor interval. So this defines the heartbeat. How frequently does MaxScale actually go back to the server, go back to all these servers and check for their status? So that is 1000 millisecond, which translates to 1 second. So normally it's set up to 2 or 2.5 seconds. So it's up to you how much you want to set it up. That doesn't really matter. But of course, don't put such a low number that it becomes an overhead for the MaxScale server. All right. So and this tells us that our slaves should be read-only, right? So MaxScale will ensure that our slaves will always be running in a read-only mode, which is what we want. Then 2 important properties that defines the failover behavior or auto failover controller. So this particular property is telling us that MaxScale should be the one that is handling the failover of your master nodes or any other nodes, right? And then auto rejoin equals to true. This tells MaxScale to what to do when the particular node that went down earlier and comes back online, what to do with that node. So this is telling MaxScale to rejoin that particular node into this cluster, right? Into this 4 node cluster. We'll see that in action in a very short while. Okay, so the other section of this particular config is the read-write splitter service. So we can see here the router is a read-write splitter. So this read-write splitter actually will be running on these 4 servers, right? So what this does is that it's basically splitting your reads and writes. So whenever your query is doing some reading of data, MaxScale will actually redirect those queries to one of these slaves, or whichever nodes are defined as slaves or running as a slave. So those select queries or read-only queries will be sent to these slaves. And whenever you are trying to change some data, like insert, update, delete, those queries will be sent to the master node. Whichever is the master node as of that point, MaxScale will send that query to that particular node. So it's basically doing a load balancing for us. So if we look at it, this particular property tells what to do if you lose a connection, right? So overhead, we can see that under the connection section, connection column, we have 0 connections at a time, because of course we haven't made any connection to MaxScale yet, so which is understandable. Later on we will do that, and we will see that we have 1 connection or 2 connections, depending on how many connections we make to the MaxScale server. We will see that in action. What happens when our connection to the master goes down, or the master node itself goes down? What happens then? So MaxScale, based on this particular property, master reconnection equals to true, MaxScale will automatically make a new connection to the new master node, right? So whenever MaxScale promotes a server as a master, so based on this property, MaxScale will ensure that you always have a connection, active connection to the master and to all the nodes basically. We will see that in action as well. So this will ensure that we never face a downtime of your within your application, right? So your application always have a connection, or even if it doesn't, MaxScale will ensure that it does. Okay, so how the failures are handled, right? So if the master failure, what happens when there's a master failure? So it will do error on write. So if let's say your master goes down, MaxScale doesn't show or doesn't throw any messages or any error messages back to the client, which is what we want. But whenever the node tries to write something on that node, whichever was the original master, it will give an error message only at that point in time. But because MaxScale, based on this particular property, MaxScale will automatically be promoting a new node as a master. So this would never happen. Ideally, this would never happen, because you will always have a new node that is running as a master. So MaxScale will automatically sending your write queries to the new master. But what happens if all the nodes go down, and then you have only 1 master running, and that also goes down? So it's a real disaster. So you basically saying that you don't have a server in your cluster, right? So that in that scenario, this particular thing will take place. So it will not do anything, or it will not throw any error messages back to the client until the client tries to write something on the server, or read something on the server, basically. All right. So transaction replay, this is another interesting one, or rather very important one. So what happens that when you are running a very long running transaction, or you are doing something crazy that is taking a very long time to do some writing on your master node, or any other node that is a master, right? So what happens if while you're writing, that particular node goes down, right? So MaxScale will actually using this particular property, it will make sure that that particular transaction is actually re-executed on your second node, or whichever node is promoted as a new master. So MaxScale will basically run that, replay that transaction on your new node. Same thing goes for your select queries. If you're running a select statement and that particular node goes down, MaxScale will automatically execute that select query on the other node, and then your client, your end user, or your application will basically be getting the output regardless, right? But of course, if there are no more nodes available on the cluster, then of course this will happen, right? So the MaxScale can't do anything, can't do magic. MaxScale can't do magic. So you still must have at least one node running in order to have the queries executed somewhere. Okay, so this particular property is not really important for this particular demo, but this is how MaxScale decides your slave selections, right? So what that means that because you have many choices for this as a slave, right? We have 72, 73, 74. So when you send a query to do some selection or reading, MaxScale has to send that query into one of these slaves. So how does MaxScale decide which server should basically execute your select query? So there are multiple options available. You can read the knowledge base for that. But this adaptive routing is something that I'm just testing myself. So this adaptive routing basically tells MaxScale to analyze the server response over a period of time, and then whichever server is giving the best average response time, the MaxScale will send more and more queries to that particular node. So if, let's say, that particular node starts to get overloaded and then its response starts to get slightly poorer, MaxScale will basically be sending the queries to another node. So in this case, you can say that is more of a distributed query distribution, basically. All right. So if you scroll down a little bit, you can see that this MaxAdmin, this section has been commented on, and this MaxAdmin listener has been commented as well. So starting with MaxScale 2.3, MaxAdmin is no longer the advised service to use. So it's going to be deprecated, or it's been already deprecated, but it's still available, but probably it's going to be removed completely from the next future version. So that's why I have commented this out. So they're not going to run when you start the MaxScale. So the last thing to take note is the listener, the read-write splitter listener. So if we scroll up a little bit, so we have this service name, right? This service name is for the read-write service. So the same service name is being mentioned here in this listener. So this is basically binding this listener to this particular service. So we are telling MaxScale that all the clients that are coming in to MaxScale as a MariaDB client, right? So using a MariaDB client, that can be anything. That can be your IDSQL, or maybe you're even a command line client like MySQL client. So they can connect to MaxScale on this particular port, 4006. This port is, of course, is your choice, whatever you want to put here. So the application needs to connect to that particular port. And so whichever application is connected to this particular port will be going through this service, right? So we can make use of this read-write splitter service when we connect to MaxScale using this particular port. All right, so enough talking. Let's quit here. I have a MaxScale, or rather MariaDB client already installed on this MaxScale server. So let's take a quick look at that. RPM-QA for MariaDB. We should see a MariaDB client here. Yeah, okay. So we can see there's MariaDB client and common libraries or common binaries are already installed here, which is fine. So now we should be able to uh, execute our MySQL command. This user I have already created in the database, and we can see that this minus h parameter is representing or is telling which host to connect to. So this 232 is our MaxScale IP address. And so we are connecting from MaxScale to the MaxScale service. And then you can see that the port that we just now saw in the server in the MaxScale or CNF file. So we are using the same port. So when I press enter here, we will be connected to MaxScale, MaxScale MySQL service or MaxScale MariaDB service. All right, so we are connected here. Okay, so if I do, so you can see that we get exactly the same interface as we would have connected directly to the database, right? So this is what MaxScale provides. So for your applications or your end users or your BI tools or whatever that may be that you are trying to connect to the database, if they connect to MaxScale, they will not see any difference, right? So they can use the same driver, same client that they can use to connect to MariaDB server. So they can use the same set of drivers or clients to connect to MaxScale, and then they get all the benefits that MaxScale provides, right? So if I show it, we can see exactly the same output as we got here. So this means that we are already connected to this particular cluster, and then of course we can see here under the connections column that we have one connection that is currently coming in from MaxScale. So you can see we have one connection to MaxScale, but MaxScale internally has one connection to each node, right? So of course MaxScale needs a connection for each node so that it can serve our reads and write requirements, right? Because it's going to distribute the queries to any of these slaves, any of these nodes. So it needs an active connection. Okay, I'm going to do one more quick thing. Let's start up a separate terminal. I'm going to not use full screen. So I'm going to go to the MaxScale server 232. All right. So if from here, if I, sorry, wrong thing. Again, wrong thing. Yeah. So if I do another connection to MaxScale service here now, you will see what happens here. So now we got two connections on each node, right? So we have one connection that is here in this particular window, and then we have one connection that is coming from here. So I'm going to take this one and I'm going to exit from here. So you can see and exit this window as well. So you can see we are back to one connection now, which is this particular guy. All right. Okay, so we can see that we have a GTID that is consistent for each node. All right, so let's do some testing. So I'm going to exit from the MySQL MariaDB client here, and because since this is a master node, let's do that. Yeah, so this is a master node. We can see that it's showing the master status. Okay, so I'm going to do shutdown. We can also see that 71 is running at the master node. Okay, so from here, if I log into this slave 72, I get to show slave status, and we should see the same GTID that MaxScale MaxCTR is showing us. So which is what we expected to see. And then we can see that the IO errors or SQL errors are empty. So which means that our server is running in perfectly good shape. And we can see the master host as well, right? So which is what we already know from MaxScale, that 71 is our master host. So our slave status is also pointing back to the same node. And also you can see that the log file is also showing the same log file that we saw here through the master status, right? So which is pretty cool. Okay, so now let's do stop MariaDB. So when we do a stop MariaDB server, pay attention to this particular window and see what happens there. Okay. enter, we'll see that that node goes down, and then we should see another node promoted as a master. Yeah. So the 72 now becomes the master node. So if I do show slave status here, what happens? Nothing. So it's no longer the slave, right? So this particular node is no longer the slave. But if we go to 73, which is still a slave, show slave status, we can see that. So again, the GTID is consistent, and yeah, and everything looks fine. And then the master info, now the master host is pointing to this node. So what MaxScale has done here is that when this particular node went down, the server, what the master node went down, MaxScale basically went into all the remaining slaves and then executed a change master command on all these slaves to point to 72 as a new master, right? So so this particular node became the master node. And so MaxScale has done so many things. So imagine if we didn't have a MaxScale server, so somebody or some DBA would have to manually log into all these nodes, identify the problem first, and then execute the change master command to point to this particular node. So it's a big headache, but MaxScale has taken care of that without any single manual intervention, right? Okay, so now we can see that this particular connection is 0, of course, because this node is down. Okay. We have this particular database, use guest show table. So we have a bunch of tables. Select count star from T. Okay, so we got only one row here. Okay, so we got okay. Okay, so we have a column and a timestamp column. Okay, let's do another database. World. Sure table. Okay, yeah. Count start from T. Oh, so this looks like a big table. Okay, so it has 2 million records. Fine. Okay, so now I have executed this bunch of queries. So how do I know that? Because we are connected to a MaxScale node, right? So we expect that these queries should be executing on one of these slaves, 72, or sorry, in this case we have 73 and 74. Okay, so if how do I do that? Let's say select ID from T, limit 1. Okay, so we have this one record here. There's a neat trick here. There's a global variable called hostname. So we can actually add that particular variable in this query, and then this basically, depending on where this query is executed or which particular server this query is executed, we will see this host name as an output from that particular server. So let's run this query now. And then, yes, we can see that we are actually running this query on 74, but we are connected to MaxScale. So meaning we haven't specifically connected to 74. We just connected to MaxScale node, and MaxScale internally executed it on 74. Let's see if it actually goes to another node ever. So I'm executing multiple times. Yeah. Okay. So after some execution, then we can see that the last two queries it actually executed on 73, but it never really goes to 72, right? Because 72 is a master node, and the master node will only execute your queries if those queries are changing some data, right? Or there's another way to execute your query into the master node, which is to begin a transaction, right? So you can either do that through begin. You can just do begin. That also starts a transaction, or you can do rollback. Rollback will end the transaction, or you can also do start transaction. Right. So this also will actually initiate a new transaction. So now, if I execute the same query again, the select, because we are in a transaction right now. So this, I expect this to run on 72, and indeed it does. So no matter how many times we execute it, it will always execute on the 72 server, which is the master. Because we are in a transaction, so everything must be consistent within the same server. So that's why it choose a master node for this transaction. So if I do a rollback or a commit, so either will basically end your transaction. Rollback, if I execute now, so we are back to 74 and 73. Yeah, 74 and 73. All right, so let's do one more thing. I'm going to stop this server as well. 73. Stop MariaDB. All right, this is down, and I'm going to split this one into another new terminal at the bottom, and this one, because we still don't have a session to 74. So I'm going to make a new session to 74, and I'm going to stop MariaDB, this one as well. So now we are left with only one server, which is the master node 72. All right. So now when I execute the same select query, of course, there are no slaves available. So what does MaxScale do? MaxScale will run it on the node available, so which is the master node. So we don't, in this case, we are not really starting any transaction. We are just running a normal ordinary session, and then it's running everything on your master node. Okay. Okay, so let's start 71 again. Start MariaDB. All right, so we can see this particular node is started, but there are no connections, right? So the connection is 0, which is understandable because the server just started, and then our MaxScale doesn't really know at the moment, or it doesn't really feel the necessity to make a new connection immediately to this particular node. But whenever I run a select statement, so now MaxScale, because MaxScale internally knows that there's a slave available, right? So this statement will not be running on 72 anymore, because MaxScale knows that there's a slave available. It will make a new connection here. You will see one appearing here shortly when I execute it, and then this particular query will execute on 71. We'll see that. Let's try. All right, so we can see it executed on 71, and indeed we can see that there's a new connection that MaxScale has done for us automatically. So in this scenario, we can clearly see that whatever may be going on with the database, right? As long as there's a single node available, your client will never face a downtime, right? Let's start up other nodes. 72 is already running, which is fine. Let's do a start of this node again. And let's do a start of this node also. Okay. Okay, so now we can see that we have all the slaves running, but of course these two slaves newly started, 0 connections at the time. If I execute this query multiple times, so whenever it decides to go to the other slaves, it will make a new connection. Yeah, so now it's making a new connection, and hopefully it does. Yeah, so it took some time, and then it actually made a new connection to the database, and we got the output that we were expecting. Okay, but still this particular node is haven't been connected yet, but that's fine. We don't really need to worry about it. We know that this particular thing works. Okay. Now let's look into the table. Okay, so we have T1 and T2. What's in the T2? Select from T2. Okay, so we've got 3 records. Okay, fine. Okay, yeah, so let's do one more thing. Since we have this table available, I'm going to insert into this table. Yeah, insert into T2, and then the values that I want to insert. Value, I'm going to insert the same global variable hostname. So why I'm doing this? Because I want to see whether this insert query actually executes on the master node or not, right? So and then it's going to take the hostname variable from whichever server is running on, and then insert that value into the database. Let's do that. I'm going to quickly insert multiple rows, and then now when I select, we should see that all these nodes were actually on 74. Okay, so just to do a quick demo, I'm going to stop this server as well. I'm going to stop this server as well. Okay, so this particular node goes down. So we should have another master available very soon. Yeah, so we got 71 as a master now. So what happens if I run this insert statement again? So we expect to see 3 records inserted that should show us 71 as the value. So 71 as the value in the table. And indeed, the last 3 rows are actually 71. So we know that this particular 3 statements that we executed, those were executed by MaxScale on the new master node. So again, we never faced any disconnection or any error messages in the MaxScale window or MaxScale connection. So everything was smooth and seamless. No problems at all. Okay. Okay. So now let's get this particular node started. The one we stopped just now. Okay, so that should join back as a slave. And then you will see this particular value. It was 96 or something. But as soon as the server started joined the cluster as a slave, the GTID caught up, right? So the replication took place, and then the data was synced basically. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a whole bunch of rows in this particular table, T2. Insert into T2. Then I'm going to just insert values in column 1 because the column name is column, COL. The ID column is a auto increment number, so I'm not giving that here. And then I'm going to select call from T2. So I'm selecting from the same table and inserting into the same table. This will start to insert values exponentially, or start to insert rows exponentially. We will see that in a while. Okay, so 19 rows inserted. The second time will be 19 times 2 rows, 38, 26, 152, 304. So it's growing exponentially and it's getting slower and slower, of course. Okay, a couple of more times. So all these inserts, we know that they are running on the master node. All right. So, and one last time before we stop this madness. I am running these 5 VMs on my laptop. So yeah, so the performance is not that great. Okay, so now the data is being inserted. You will see the GTID is 215 here, but the others not yet. So it's slowly catching up because it's a whole lot of records that are supposed to be sent to the slave nodes, right? Okay, so now what we are going to do is we have already seen the connection failover taking place, right? So when we stop the master node, the connection automatically switches to the new master node, and then the MaxScale still continues to work without any failures or any downtime. We know that this particular node 71 is a master. So I'm going to okay, so let's clear this screen. I'm going to put this here, but not execute it as of now. So I am going to start this thing again. So if I do a select 22, I believe it should be 1.2 million. Yeah, so 1.2 million records in this particular table. So if we do this now, so it means that it's going to insert 1.2 million records again into this table. So we will have something like 2.4 or 2.5 million records by the end of this statement. Right? So, but we're going to do something crazy. I'm going to press enter here on this particular insert statement so that this statement starts. MaxScale will send this statement immediately to this master node because that's what MaxScale is supposed to do. But as soon as I press enter here, I'm going to go to this window and stop the MariaDB server. So let's enter over here, enter. So we know this goes down, but this statement is still running. We didn't face any issue or any error. This master is online. So now MaxScale should be doing this query replay, automatic query replay on this particular node. Keep an eye on the GTIDs. So this one is still 215. This one is still 215. This window is still running. It didn't give any error messages, even though we stopped the database where it was writing. Okay, so finished. This one is 216 already, but this is still showing 215. So let's do a select count from T2. It's going to run this on one of these slaves. We see still the old value, right? Because the GTID is not being synced yet. The data is still being pushed to the slaves. So let's try one more time. Still the same value because we know the GTID is still not 216. So we'll just wait for the GTIDs to, yeah, so now it's 216. When we run this select query now, we should see 2.4 million. There you go. So we got 2.4 million rows inserted on the master node, even though we stopped this master or stopped the original master where the query was running. So MaxScale continued to perform the query on the new master, so which is pretty awesome. In the previous versions of MaxScale 2.2, there were no such features available of connection or auto reconnection or query replay. So whenever you had a node down, MaxScale will throw an error message back to the client that, oh, sorry, your server is down, you need to reconnect to the MaxScale again. So when the client did a reconnection, MaxScale did a reconnection to the endpoints one more time. But now with this 2.3 release, the awesome MaxScale team has done a great job, and then we can see clearly that no matter what we do, we still get a smooth experience out of our connection and out of our application without any downtime at all. Okay, so now let's start up this server, but we know that this server is going to take some time to sync up because it's still running on an older GTID. Let's do that. Start server. We can see that also in action. So I'm going to start this server. I'm going to connect to MySQL quickly and show slave status very quickly. Oops. Show slave status. We can see that we should see something like seconds behind. Yeah. So we can see that. So this particular node is a few seconds behind, but now it's already caught up. We can see it's 216 already. So if we run this show slave status again, we should see that GTID is in sync with the new master. The new master is 2216, which is what we see here, and the seconds behind is 0 now. Right. So this is something to watch out for, to keep an eye on this particular thing on all the slaves to make sure that we don't run behind the master. But anyway, the point is, MaxScale is able to do all these things for us. There is another setting for MaxScale that you can define, which will basically give you consistent reading, right? So now we actually saw that when we are running this select statement, even though the slaves are lagging behind, but MaxScale is still sending those queries to the slave because all of the slaves are on the same GTID, right? So there are no preferences basically. So MaxScale is still sending those queries to the slave, which is giving us some inconsistent data. but there is some properties in the MaxScale that is called Causal Reads. So if we enable that, MaxScale will make sure that if as soon as you change some data in the database, your next queries will actually be going to the master node, or MaxScale will make sure that you pick up a slave that has the latest data, or it will send to the master node if needed. So you will eventually get consistent reading values. But we are not testing that today. So far, we have seen that how MaxScale handles the cluster, or handles the master slave setup, and how it handles the auto failover, how it handles the reconnection, and query replay. All those things works really well. And then overall, you got a very solid and high available solution through MaxScale. Thank you, guys. That's all I have for today.